Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this journey. What you're about to hear may change the way you see yourself and the world forever. For more than 6 decades, I devoted my life to understanding the human psyche. I listened to countless dreams, studied symbols from every culture, and observed the same hidden patterns repeating themselves through generations. And throughout all those years, one realization kept returning to me with a weight I could never ignore. Jesus of Nazareth delivered a warning so deep, so psychologically precise, that humanity's failure to understand it has created a crisis far more dangerous than any external catastrophe. His message was not meant only for the people of his time. It was meant for us, for this generation, living in an age where technology has expanded our reach but shrunk our inner world, where progress has accelerated far beyond our emotional and spiritual maturity. We have entered a moment that I can describe only as a psychological point of no return, and most people do not even realize it has arrived. What troubles me most is how quietly this shift happened. While millions were absorbed by glowing screens, distracted by endless entertainment, and lulled into the belief that life would continue indefinitely as it always had, the door that leads to true inner transformation began to close. And it is almost shut now, silently, without drama, without warning. During my years as a psychiatrist, I learned something fundamental. The human psyche obeys laws as exact as those governing the physical world. You cannot violate these laws without consequences. You cannot repress your inner truth without paying a psychological price. You cannot ignore the call to authentic growth and expect to remain whole. Jesus understood these laws. Long before psychology became a science, he spoke in a language his time could understand, stories, symbols, images. He described the inner journey every human must take, the necessity of confronting one's own darkness, the urgency of becoming aware, and he foresaw what would happen when a society advanced outwardly while remaining undeveloped inwardly. A collective crisis unlike anything the world had ever seen. That is where we stand today. A humanity inflated with ego, but starved of depth. A generation that confuses stimulation with meaning. A civilization that has forgotten how to see. In all my years studying the unconscious, I encountered the same archetypes in every dream, every culture, every myth. And slowly, painfully, I realized that we were approaching a threshold. A moment where either consciousness would evolve or collapse under its own weight. And now, as we move forward, we must examine what happens when an entire civilization refuses to look inward. That is the path that leads us naturally into the next chapter, the collapse of the collective ego. When we look around today, it becomes impossible to deny that something fundamental in the human psyche is breaking down. The signs are everywhere: rising anxiety, widespread depression, exploding polarization, and a constant sense of inner emptiness that no amount of technology or entertainment seems able to fill. What we are witnessing is not a series of disconnected social problems. It is the unraveling of the collective ego itself. Humanity has reached a level of outer development unmatched in history. We can cross oceans in hours, communicate instantly across continents, and access unlimited information with a single gesture. Yet inwardly, we have become increasingly fragile. Like a towering building constructed on sand, the modern ego has grown larger and more elaborate, even as its foundations have remained dangerously shallow. This is precisely what Jesus warned about through symbols and parables. He spoke of a moment when the surface of life would become blindingly bright, while the inner world remained in darkness. A moment when individuals would appear powerful, yet crumble under the slightest pressure. A moment when the shadow, everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, would erupt into the world with a force no one could control. We are living in that moment now. Consider how quickly people turn against one another today. Entire nations split into opposing tribes, each projecting their unowned darkness onto the other, convinced that the enemy lies outside, never within. This is classic shadow projection on a collective scale. What once happened within a single individual is now happening across entire societies. And because the shadow has been ignored for too long, it returns with greater violence. The collective ego has become inflated, swollen with certainty, self-importance, and the illusion of control. But inflated things are fragile. They burst at the slightest puncture, and when an ego bursts, whether individual or collective, it collapses into chaos, confusion, and fear. The symptoms are unmistakable: the epidemic of loneliness, the explosion of addictions, not only to substances but to screens, noise, superficial validation, the desperation for distraction, the inability to sit in silence even for a moment. These are not random modern quirks. They are signs of a civilization that has lost contact with its inner center. And here lies the tragedy. Instead of turning inward to understand the crisis, society turns even more outward. More stimulation, more speed, more consumption, more escape. The ego tries desperately to preserve itself, unaware that this very struggle accelerates its collapse. Yet this collapse, as frightening as it is, also reveals a deeper truth. The psyche is demanding transformation. It is forcing humanity to confront what it has avoided for generations. The unconscious will not remain silent forever. When ignored, it erupts. When repressed, it returns with force. And when a civilization refuses to grow inwardly, the unconscious eventually tears through the structures holding it back. Which brings us to the next crucial question. If the ego is collapsing, what stands behind it? What must emerge for true transformation to begin? To answer that, we must turn to the realm of the shadow and the path of individuation. If the collapse of the collective ego reveals anything, it is this: beneath the surface of our identities lies a vast territory we have spent generations trying to avoid. This territory is what Jung called the shadow, the hidden side of our nature, the part we reject, deny, or fear. And yet, paradoxically, it is also the very place where genuine transformation begins. For decades, I sat across from patients who arrived certain that their suffering was caused by external circumstances: a relationship, a job, a disappointment, an injustice. But as their stories unfolded, something deeper always appeared. Beneath every crisis was a part of themselves they had refused to see. Anger they buried, desires they repressed, pain they never processed, talents they abandoned, truths they feared. Each of these formed pieces of the shadow, quietly shaping their lives from underneath. What is true for individuals is equally true for civilizations. When a society refuses to acknowledge its shadow, it becomes ruled by it. And once the shadow gains enough force, it begins to manifest not subtly but explosively. We see this now in the polarization that divides nations, in the hostility between groups, in the speed with which people dehumanize one another. These eruptions are not ideological, they are psychological. They come from the same place within us that we have never learned to face. This is why Jesus' teachings, when understood psychologically, become so urgently relevant. When he spoke of removing the beam from one's own eye before judging another, he was not offering a moral lesson. He was describing the necessity of meeting one's shadow. When he spoke of dying to oneself, he described the surrender of the inflated ego. And when he spoke of being reborn, he described the emergence of a new center of being that can only appear after confronting the inner darkness. Individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole, begins exactly there. It is not about perfection, nor about achieving a spiritual ideal. It is about integrating what we have pushed away. It is about reclaiming the parts of ourselves that were exiled into the unconscious long ago. It is about learning to see what we once feared to look at. But this work is not easy. The ego resists it with all its strength, because the ego survives by maintaining the illusion that it is already complete. To meet the shadow is to recognize our own limits, contradictions, wounds, and hidden motives. It requires humility, honesty, and above all, courage, the courage to see what has remained unseen for most of one's life. Yet those who take this step discover something extraordinary. The shadow does not only contain darkness, it also holds vitality, creativity, strength, and authenticity. What appears frightening at first often becomes the very source of renewal. This is why the crisis unfolding around us, painful as it is, also carries within it a profound invitation, a call to enter the depths we have been avoiding. And as we continue, We must now examine how entire civilizations lose their inner guidance when this inner descent is abandoned. That path leads us naturally into the next chapter, the death and rebirth of culture itself. As we move deeper into this exploration, we must widen our view beyond the individual psyche and look at something far larger, the psychological life of entire civilizations. Just as a person can lose their inner center and collapse into confusion, societies too can drift away from meaning, abandon their symbolic foundations, and enter long periods of darkness. What we are experiencing today is not merely social unrest. It is a collective rite of passage, a cultural death without guidance. In ancient times, humanity understood something we have forgotten. Transformation requires structure. People were not left alone to navigate inner change. Young men and women underwent rites of initiation. Elders guided communities with wisdom earned through suffering. Rituals, myths, and shared symbols acted as bridges between the conscious world and the unconscious depths. These frameworks were not superstitions, they were psychological technologies, carefully crafted over thousands of years to help people confront fear, chaos, and inner fragmentation. But modern society dismantled all these supports. The old rituals disappeared, symbols lost their meaning, silence was replaced with noise, depth gave way to constant stimulation. Without realizing it, we entered a cultural adolescence, technologically brilliant but emotionally unprepared, intellectually confident but spiritually unanchored. A civilization cannot discard its inner compass without consequences. And now we are seeing the result. When a culture refuses to descend into its own depths, the unconscious erupts into collective life. Confusion increases, values invert. What once guided people becomes irrelevant or mocked. Communities fracture. The pursuit of meaning is replaced by the pursuit of distraction. The individual feels lost, and the society reflects that inner disorientation on a massive scale. This is what Jung called enantiodromia, the reversal of all things. When anything becomes too one-sided, reality forces it to swing violently to the opposite extreme. Our civilization, obsessed with progress, materialism, and ego, has crossed that threshold. Now everything suppressed returns with multiplied force: anger, fear, division, nihilism. The cultural night has begun. Yet Jesus anticipated this long before psychology existed. His apocalyptic imagery was not merely religious prophecy, it was psychological foresight. When he described nations turning against each other, people unable to see truth and love growing cold, he was describing precisely what happens when a civilization abandons its inner development. It collapses not from external enemies, but from internal fragmentation. Still, even in this darkness there is potential. In nature, winter is not only the season of death, it is also the season of hidden preparation. Seeds rest beneath the frozen soil, gathering strength for the spring. Likewise, cultural collapse, as terrifying as it appears, holds within it the possibility of renewal, but only if enough individuals maintain consciousness during the descent. This is why personal inner work is no longer a private luxury. It has become a cultural necessity. Civilization cannot rebalance itself through laws or institutions alone. It requires individuals who have gone inward, faced their own unconscious, and begun the slow work of becoming whole. These individuals form the psychic backbone of what may emerge after the collapse. And so we move toward the next turning point, the threshold Jesus spoke of, the moment when the door closes and the point of no return is reached. As a civilization drifts deeper into its own night, we inevitably arrive at a question that Jesus expressed through one of his most haunting images, the moment when a door closes and cannot be opened again. This is not a threat, nor is it punishment. It is a psychological reality. Every human system, whether an individual psyche or an entire culture, reaches a point where neglected development can no longer be postponed. Beyond that threshold, change is no longer a choice. Collapse becomes the only available outcome. Jesus illustrated this through the parable of the 10 virgins. 5 brought oil for their lamps, 5 did not. When the crucial moment arrived, those who had not prepared went searching for what they had ignored for years. But while they were away, the door closed. When they returned, they discovered that no amount of urgency, fear, or regret could open it again. When we examine this parable psychologically, the meaning becomes unmistakably clear. The oil represents consciousness, inner light created through years of honest self-reflection, confrontation with one's shadow, emotional maturity, and spiritual depth. These qualities cannot be rushed. They cannot be purchased in moments of crisis. They can only be cultivated slowly, patiently, through committed inner work. And the door, the one that eventually closes, symbolizes the developmental point after which integration is no longer possible. If a person or a civilization reaches a crisis without having built the inner structure necessary to endure it, the psyche collapses under the pressure. Not because it is being punished, but because it is unprepared. We are now standing collectively at that threshold. Many people sense it intuitively, a tightening, an acceleration, a sense that events are moving faster than we can understand. The old world feels unstable, yet the new world has not arrived. This is precisely what it feels like when a collective psyche approaches its point of no return. Old defenses fail, patterns break apart. What was hidden bursts into awareness. And those who have spent their lives avoiding inner work suddenly find themselves without the tools needed to remain grounded. This is why the crisis feels overwhelming for so many. The ego tries desperately to maintain control, but the pressure is too great. People search frantically for quick solutions, new beliefs, new distractions, new identities, but none of these can replace the years of inner preparation that were postponed. And yet, for those who have cultivated consciousness, the experience is profoundly different. They feel the same turbulence, but not the same collapse. Their inner lamp remains lit. They have the oil that allows them to navigate the darkness without being consumed by it. These individuals become silent pillars of stability, not through effort, but through the maturity they have already built. This brings us to the final and most urgent question. If the door is beginning to close, what must we do now? What choices remain? And how can we prepare in the time that is left? To answer that, we must enter the last chapter, the final call to transformation. As we stand at the threshold of a closing door, one truth becomes unavoidable. The time for hesitation is over. The crisis unfolding around us is not simply political, economic, or social, it is psychological. And no external solution, no institution, no new ideology will be able to save a civilization that refuses to transform from within. What comes next depends entirely on the depth of inner work individuals are willing to undertake now, while the window is still open. For decades, I have observed the same pattern in people on the edge of collapse. Those who ignored their inner life for too long eventually reached a breaking point where everything they depended on began to crumble. Relationships, beliefs, identity, purpose. At that moment, they faced a choice: descend consciously into the depths and begin the slow work of transformation, or fall into fragmentation, confusion, and despair. The same dynamic now applies to humanity as a whole. This is why the call to awaken is not dramatic exaggeration, it is psychological necessity. If the ego collapses without a deeper center having been formed, the result is disintegration. But if a person has engaged in honest inner work, they discover something extraordinary. Beneath the ego there is a stable, timeless core, what Jung called the self. This is the true foundation upon which a human life can stand, even in the midst of chaos. Jesus spoke of this long before psychology existed. When he urged people to build their house upon rock instead of sand, he was describing this inner foundation. When he spoke of the kingdom of heaven being within, he was pointing to this deeper center. And when he warned that some would arrive unprepared when the moment came, he captured the very crisis we are living through now. Preparation, then, is not mystical. It is profoundly practical. It means learning to listen to your dreams, because the unconscious speaks through them. Shadow. Watching how you project your disowned qualities onto others. It means questioning the roles and masks you hide behind. It means cultivating silence, real silence, where the noise of the ego dissolves and the voice of the deeper self can finally be heard. It also means seeking help when needed. No one completes this journey alone. Even I spent years in analysis with other analysts, exploring the depths that no one can navigate without guidance. Others who are sincerely committed to inner growth, not through superficial community, but through shared dedication to truth, honesty, and transformation. The crisis moving toward us will not wait. It accelerates each year, each month, each day. But the outcome is not predetermined. Awaken. If enough people do the inner work, the collapse of the old world can become the birth of something new, a humanity grounded not in ego, but in consciousness. Yet if too few are prepared, the fragmentation will be severe and the suffering immense. This is the final call. Awaken now, not tomorrow, not when circumstances force you. The door is closing, but it is not yet shut. To sleep or to awaken, to avoid or to transform, will shape not only your own destiny, but the future of the world.